Hi, I'm Dr. Stan Steindl. Welcome to Compassion in a T-shirt. On this channel, you'll see weekly conversations about compassion and self-compassion, including from a range of perspectives, and all about cultivating a more compassionate life. Today I'll be speaking with Dr. Karen Bluth, who's at the Department of Psychiatry at the University of North Carolina School of Medicine. She's also a fellow at the Frankie Porter Graham Child Development Institute. She's dedicated her working life to promoting the well-being of teens through mindfulness and self-compassion. She has several books, which I've listed in the description below, including my favourite, the Self-Compassion Workbook for Teens, Mindfulness and Self-Compassion Skills to Overcome Self-Criticism and Embrace Who You Are. She also has a forthcoming book available now for pre-order called Mindful Self-Compassion for Teens in Schools. She talks a bit about this forthcoming book towards the end of our conversation. And so I bring you Dr. Karen Bluth. Dr. Karen Bluth, welcome to Compassion in a T-shirt.
It's great to be here. Thanks for asking me to be here.
You mention on your website that your journey into meditation, mindfulness, self-compassion kind of began serendipitously as a teenager with a school assignment, I think, that was due the next day or something like that. Could you tell us a bit about that story, I suppose, and maybe how things have progressed from there?
Sure. I was a senior in high school, and it was, I think, 1975. And I had an independent study project for an English class that I had to do, and I needed to hand in the topic the next day.
Ah,
And I didn't have a topic. So I was driving down the road, and I happened to see out of the corner of my eye something about meditation. And what it was TM, Transcendental Meditation, which was big then in the mid 70s. And I remembered hearing something about meditation in one of my classes. And actually, we had a social studies class that was a humanities class. And there was something about it that resonated with me. So when I saw, meditation, I drove in and took some brochures, and they said, come back on Saturday with flowers and fruit. So I did a piece of fruit and some flowers. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but I did that. And they gave me a mantra, as they do with TM, and I started practicing. And I practiced pretty regularly. I was always pretty disciplined student, practiced pretty regularly for a while until I went to college, and then kind of dropped off and, you know, in college, and got back into it after college. So maybe mid 80s. And then it was pretty regular. I started sitting with a regular a sangha, a weekly meditation group, and started reading more and studying and going on regular retreats. And since then, it's really been a cornerstone in my life. Um, it's been an anchor and has really helped me through, all the things that we go through as adults. And uh, so I really, it's important to me to bring this to teens in some form or format.
mm,
I've always been during this. So the other piece is during this time, I became a teacher, a classroom teacher, and I saw how much kids were struggling. I was teaching upper elementary for a few years, so that would be 10, 11, 12, and then started teaching middle school, so 12, 13, 14. And kids were struggling. I saw how much they were struggling. And so went back to school and brought these two different threads of my life together, my meditation practice, as well as my interest, my passion really for kids and kids' well-being, teens' well-being.
mm. One of the things that I often find challenging for myself and my personal practice, but also when talking to people about, sort of beginning a meditation journey is that regular practice piece, being able to have that. Yeah, is it discipline or what do you think it was for you that really, I don't know, motivated you in that way to really engage with it and to have it as that really very regular part of your life? There were little gaps there, I guess, as well and whatever, but it does sound like something early on grabbed you.
I think early on, initially, it was a search for something more, for meaning in life. I was raised in a pretty non-religious household, and it wasn't about stress reduction. It's interesting. Now we talk about stress reduction a lot, but it wasn't that. It was a search for meaning, some kind of meaning to life. What's life all about? I was 16 years old or something like that. What has helped me with my regular practice is there's something that shifted for me when I stopped making myself do it. When it's a chore, when it's one more thing on your to-do list, you're less likely to get to it. So at some point early on, I think maybe late 80s, um, I stopped making myself do it, and I saw it as something that was nurturing for myself, something that I would do for myself to take care of myself. That was good. It was like eating good food, or getting a good night's sleep. And so I stopped forcing myself to do it. And once that shift happened, um, it wasn't hard. It wasn't hard to maintain a practice. I mean, I miss days. I mean, don't get me wrong. I miss
Yeah.
days, but I don't beat myself up for missing days. It's like, okay, I missed a day. I can feel it in my life. I can feel that that stress level just a little bit higher, I'm a little bit more tense. I'm a little bit more negative. I'm a little bit more like, going around with tension. Um, but it's like, okay, so now I need to, you know, get back on it and then practice. And then
Yeah.
I'll just take a few minutes, I'll take, whatever time I have. Right before we did this, we started this, I had just a few minutes and I sat and so it's like whenever if I miss it, whenever I can squeeze it in, I'll do
Mm.
it.
Yeah, it sort of began sort of in a kind of a searching for something, meaning and so on. You perhaps actually started to find little bits of meaning or certainly value, and then gradually you let go of the idea of it being a chore, and it became more just a part of your day that nurtures you and sort of, in a sense, kind of feels good or worthwhile or sort of almost becomes really a joy, really, doesn't it? And so you feel spontaneously wanting to actually do it. Little gaps, but you
Mhm.
also mentioned that as that adolescence was a bit of a tricky time for you, I think, as it is for all of us. It's funny because adolescence was certainly a tricky time for me, and the kind of my little discovery was Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. That was the thing
Mhm.
that just sort of appeared and set me on a bit of a path as well into eventually psychology and therapy and so on. But what was all like that for you? And was there something there that was part of what has inspired you to be there for teens or teenagers and really spend this time being helpful for them?
Yeah, I would say it was a little bit more than a little tricky for me. It
Okay.
was a really hard time. It was very difficult. It was very painful. I think as it is for a lot of teens. Um, there was nothing that happened that was, particularly traumatic or anything like that, but it was just hard. I felt, um, insecure. I felt, less than, I felt unworthy. I mean, all these things that a lot of young people feel. And yeah, so it was hard. So at some point, I mean, I've always had a passion for kids, but at some point I just decided that I wanted to spend my time here on earth trying to make life easier, um, even a little bit for teens,
Mm.
for going through that particularly what can be a particularly trying developmental stage.
Yes, I think
And
I
I
was,
think it's a lot. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
sorry, I was just I was thinking that was my classic Australian sort of understating of things, a little bit tricky. It's it's often much tougher than that, really, isn't it? There's all sorts of things going on within ourselves, but also, especially interpersonally and socially, it can be
Mhm,
very, very tricky. The self-conscious emotions are the thing that really start to develop, and we worry about ourselves and how we fit or belong in the group, and are we worthy? And yeah, those are some very major challenges, really.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, that I think is often part of developmental path, what teens feel in these years. And I think that's something that has probably been around for a long time, if not forever. I do think, however, that there are a lot of things going on now that make it even harder for teens. I think it's harder now than it was certainly when I was a teen, generations past. Um, and some of those things are, pretty obvious, things like social media, which isn't all bad by any means. Um, but it's a big setup for social comparison, comparing yourself with others and feeling less than and unworthy. And then, the amount of violence, in our world today, climate change. I mean, there's so many things out there that cause tremendous stress
Mm.
for teens that weren't there when I was growing. I mean, we worried about the Vietnam War,
Mhm.
but we weren't worried that the world was coming to an end.
Mm.
And we weren't worried that people were going to break into our school with guns.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know, we had safe places, and I think a lot of times because of social media, teens today don't have a safe place. They go home and even if home has been a safe place, which of course it isn't always, because of social media, they can always be reached. It's always there. There's no shutting out um, those people in your social life that are hurting you.
Mm. Yes, it's sort of profound, isn't it, really? I recall I was growing up sort of probably more in the 80s, and we had the doomsday clock a little bit with the Cold War, and that I remember that being on my mind, and we also had the HIV AIDS kind of, a lot of the advertising campaigns over here were the Grim Reaper type ads, and very sort of scary stuff. But there was an ability to go home and just step away, I suppose, wasn't there, from all of that? As long as for me, as long as the TV wasn't on, we were just at home and you know able to have something of a sense of safeness, depending on one's home environment, of course. But now there seems to be, yeah, just that. So it's so much more difficult to step away and to
Mhm,
sort of feel safe in that sense, and especially on the social comparison front.
mhm, mhm.
Um,
And research shows, I mean, surveys show that climate change is a big worry for a lot of teens.
mm,
It's a real thing. And of course, social comparison also. I mean,
mm,
that's there as well. But
mm,
it's um, yeah, it's there and it's very present and it's a real fear.
Mm. A sort of a real existential threat that is kind of ever present at the moment for teens.
Mhm.
You've written the Self-Compassion Workbook for teens, and you draw on the mindful self-compassion approach developed by Kristen Neff and Chris Germer. But you've sort of adapted it, I think, for young people. So what sort of how are you approaching all of that? You know, how are you helping to develop self-compassion, I guess, for teens? Or are there adaptations you've made there, or do you pitch it sort of differently, or so on?
It's yes and no. So yes, in that we've made things developmentally appropriate. So um, there's a lot of art that we've incorporated into the program and into the workbook and into my other books also. There's music meditations, there's stories, and so there's a few games in the class. So there are different things that are interesting and engaging for teens that are not in the adult program. But the intention is the same, and the basic goal, the basic what it's all about is very much the same, which is about cultivating self-compassion, learning how to be kind and supportive to yourself when you're up against challenges. How do you develop these coping resources? How do you learn to deal with difficult situations, difficult emotional situations, things that make you feel stressed, things that make you feel worried or anxious or sad or, make you feel lonely? How do you deal with that? And we don't teach teens that, or we don't teach kids that really very
Mm.
much, and so learning how to support yourself, that's what the adult program is about. I'm also a certified teacher of the adult program, and I teach adults all the time. And so the intention, what it's about, is very much the same.
Mm. What about even the basics, like your definition, for example, of self-compassion? How do you convey that to young people?
Yeah, so we have a little exercise that we do with them where they discover for themselves what the definition of self-compassion, and they do it um, through uh, revisiting how they would treat a friend. So the adult program does that also, but in a little bit of a different way than
Mm.
than how we do it in the teen program. And so what they learn from doing this is that, oh, they treat their friends with kindness, with support. They say things to their friends like, oh, I've been through that also. I know what that's like, which is common humanity. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
they say things to their friends like, oh, this isn't going to last forever. Um, that's mindfulness, having balanced perspective. So we do this exercise with them where they can learn where the definition of self-compassion, meaning the three components, just emerges
Hmm.
naturally, organically.
Yeah. It's just a sort of a guided discovery, just sort of exploring. Young people know a thing or two as well, don't they, about, kind of
Hmm.
what it is to be kind and kind to others and perhaps kind to themselves. So drawing that from them through experiential exercises rather than it's not a it's not a lecture or anything like that. It's very much
Right.
that kind of experiential slash guided discovery, exploring um, approach.
Yeah, and
What?
that really comes from my time in the classroom. I used that discovery approach in the classroom when I was teaching, and that's how that came into this program.
Hmm. What about some of the core practices of MSC, the affectionate breathing or the loving kindness meditations? How does that kind of get presented or worked with teens?
Yeah, Yeah, we present them. We have them in there. They're shorter. And we have a lot of other ones which we emphasize or we bring in first. So for example, breathing, what we've learned is that breathing practices are a little bit harder for teens to access than for adults.
Mm,
So we still introduce it, but we introduce other things first, like the body scan, which is easier for them to access because it's physical, it's, and the here and now stone. So things like that. So things that involve um, physical sensations are easier for teens to access
mm,
than breathing, which is also a physical sensation, but it's a little bit more abstract.
mm,
So we introduce that a little bit later.
mm. How do young people go with imagery exercises?
Um, I would say pretty much the same as adults. There are, meaning there are some um, young people that have some trouble with it, as do some adults, being able to imagine things. But there are most don't. Most teens really are fine with it. And the way we introduce something that involves guided imagery is we say something like, how many of you are into fantasy? How many of you like imagining things? So for example, we do that before the compassionate friend meditation, which we have in the very first class. And so we introduce it framed in this in a way that, we're going to go on a imaginary voyage, so close your eyes if you're comfortable doing that and bring to mind, and then we'll start going into the practice.
Mm,
But it's framed within um, this sense of, oh, this is an imaginary voyage.
mm. Yeah, so it's in the setup and the framing and so on, and just sort of easing them in, knowing that some people are more or less able to do imagery, isn't it? I had a client just this week who was an adult, but young adult, and he described how much he loves fantasy novels, but has never been able to imagine it or picture it. There's some other way that he connects with fantasy, and he said that the good side of it is that when he watches a movie from a book, he never feels bad that the characters don't look how he imagined them because he hasn't had that. He hasn't had the image.
Uh-huh.
But on the flip side, yeah, we had to sort of think about other ways in to do some of the practices, even like the compassionate
Hmm.
friend exercise, and how to do that where a literal visual picture was difficult for him.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, some people can access it through imagining a feeling or a color or something else where it doesn't have to be an actual image,
Mm,
right?
yeah. One of the things I saw on your website as well was a sort of a lovely quote from someone saying that they realized through the program the importance of patience as a thing. What would you say are some of the key qualities or those sort of discoveries maybe that you try to help young people develop, in terms of, what it is to be a compassionate person, or the qualities of compassion and self-compassion and so on.
Yeah, I think, well, I can just share what a lot of teens tend to say to us at the end of the program. Um, a lot of times they say things like, this was very eye-opening. Um, and things like I didn't think I was going to like it. My parents suggested this, or my therapist suggested this. They thought it was a good idea. I didn't think I was going to like it, but you know what? I really liked it. We hear that a lot. And
Yeah.
of course, it's teens' job to push back a little bit, to figure things out on their own. But I think the biggest thing, or maybe this is just what I'm perceiving as the biggest thing that they get from it, is that they're not alone. That the common humanity piece, that they're not alone in their suffering and their pain, and that others are going through what they're going through, and that they don't have to beat themselves up in order to be happy or successful or fulfilled or have a good life, or fill in the blank, right? We raise our kids and we do this in our families, we do this in our society, in our culture, that in order to be successful, you have to be hard on yourself, you have to push yourself. And um and what the teens learn is that they can push themselves a little bit, and there's nothing wrong with that, of course, but that they don't have to beat themselves up. There's a difference between being encouraging and being motivating and in that way, and when it goes a little bit over the top, when you're harsh to yourself, right? And that's damaging and that's painful. So often teens have said, wow, it's eye-opening. And
Mm.
then maybe follow up with something like, wow, I didn't realize, like, I didn't have to do this. I didn't have to beat myself up, or I don't have to beat myself up. And I can
Mm.
still get into a good college, and I can still get good grades. Or
Mm.
I can still be successful on, as a soccer player or as a musician or whatever.
Mm. Yes, there's an openness there, a sort of, when they came along, not sure that they're even going to like it, but they sort of opened themselves up to it a little bit and surprised themselves that actually perhaps this was good to do, was worth doing. There's a sort of a learning that happens, wisdom gets cultivated through that experience. And one of the aspects of the wisdom is the common humanity. And if we think about young people and their kind of concerns around social comparison or feeling kind of sort of isolated or not belonging or whatever it might be, the common humanity really speaks to that and suggests that actually
Mhm.
we're sort of all kind of the same. Not in every way are we exactly the same, but from that point of view of life can be difficult and suffering is a part of that, and we all sort of experience some of that. It creates a sense of togetherness and
Mhm.
belonging, and then that little piece about, yeah, trying to disentangle the sort of more self-hating, shame-based self-criticism, I guess, from something more like, well, self-improvement, encouragement, that more compassionate approach, still with aspirations to achieve and to do well, but yeah, coming along with a different tone, warmth, friendliness,
Mhm.
encouragement.
Mhm. Right. Being a friend to yourself, being a support to yourself,
Mm.
right? I mean, we talk about that in lots of different ways in um, mindful self-compassion courses, like, how can you just treat yourself the way you treat all your friends? And why not?
Yes. There's an elegant simplicity to it, isn't there, in a way, although the whole challenge then is operationalizing that and helping people to, it's the how question, too, is sort of how do we do that piece, to be more of a friend to ourselves. We're often working with, I guess, the concept of fears of compassion and fears of self-compassion, different blocks or resistances. I've done a lot of work in compassion focused therapy, and Paul Gilbert talks a lot about that. I think in MSc we talk about backdraft as one example of kind of some of the blocks that might arise. What do you notice about all of that with young people, and how do you Do you give that particular attention to help work through some of those fears or those obstacles of self-compassion?
Yeah, so I think one thing that comes up um, somewhat, I wouldn't say a huge amount, but somewhat when working with teens is the fear of if I am kind to myself, then I'm going to fail. I'm not going to ever succeed. Right. So that's probably the biggest one that we encounter. And once we can get past that, and um, it becomes, I think, a lot easier for teens. And the way we get past it is by presenting the research. We'll say, look, we have research that shows that when you're kinder to yourself, you're actually more motivated to take on new tasks, to try new things, to embrace new experiences, to take positive risks, because you don't see if you fail, you don't see yourself as a failure. You see yourself as a human being who maybe that particular thing wasn't right for you, or maybe the way that you approached it could be tweaked a little bit. But just because you don't succeed at that, it doesn't mean that you're a failure as a person.
Mm.
And so, and that's what self-compassion is all about, right? So self-compassion is all about, I'm human and I'm going to make mistakes and I'm going to fail. And that's part of being human and walking around in this human body. And it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to fail. And I can support myself through that. And so anyway, so that's how we approach it. And often when the teens hear the research, and the research is often, we have a lot of studies that have been done with teens now. And, once they hear that, it's like, oh, okay, well, research says it's okay, then maybe I should try it. So it's not a huge block. And I find that those blocks tend to be less, and even backdraft tends to be less with teens and with adults because they're younger and they haven't had as much time to um, solidify these fears. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really a very interesting one to ponder. That when we're working with adults, they've just rehearsed some of these things for much longer, I suppose, and so they're bedded down. The fears, the blocks, I mean, I remember for me, the big one was that sense of feeling undeserving of self-compassion, that I should be compassionate towards others. That's my job. I'm a psychologist or whatever, and I don't deserve my own compassion. And that by the time I was arriving at MSc, that I'd practiced that a lot, that way of thinking with young people, that, yeah, the things are still somewhat new in that area. Even self-criticism is newly developed, and perhaps maybe it is a bit more malleable. It's more responsive to some of the evidence, the research. That's the big one, if there is one, is that fear of losing self-criticism and what the implications of that will be. That I won't be as motivated, I won't be as successful. That perhaps there's something in there, but yeah, there's a way around that with young people, especially that openness piece, and that eye-opening piece is a little bit about, how we sort of explore, does it need to be self-critical? Is there perhaps another way that is maybe even more effective at helping us achieve our goals?
Hmm. Yeah, I find with adults, think about it. Adults, may have spent 40 years or longer, believing in something, and they're going to be a lot less likely or a lot more fearful to let go of that belief.
Hmm.
Whereas, teens haven't had that long,
Hmm.
to solidify those beliefs, those fears. I mean,
Yeah.
they may still be there, but they're not as solid.
Yeah. What do you find in terms of different cohorts having different blocks? For example, across the ages, I know you work quite a lot with even that 10 to 12 sort of age group, perhaps, but other age groups as well, of course, but or across the genders or across cultures, for example. Do you notice differences there?
Yeah, well, most recently in my last couple of research studies, we've worked with transgender, gender diverse teens. And I don't know if I would say there's greater fears of self-compassion there, but there's more hesitancy or resistance um, to us as we were two cisgender teachers, um, because of the narrative that's going on right now in our in the US, the socio-political narrative. So, which is a lot of um, laws being passed um, that are not friendly to trans and gender diverse teens, and um, so there was more, I would say, not with everyone by any means, but um, with some of the teens, some hesitancy, you know, as there should be, as there should be.
Hmm. Yeah, that's true. We want people to feel able to push back, to kind of express themselves. They've got a bit of fight in them there, I guess, and that's a good thing.
And to
We
Yeah, and to defend themselves against
mm,
what could be something negative coming at them. Sure. I mean,
mm.
that's healthy.
I suppose that's the thing, isn't it? If any given person really, if they are in a scenario where they're feeling more threat system activated, there's when there's more of that sort of online, then people will be more prone to feeling like they're needing to defend themselves or protect themselves from threat, and so they perhaps show a bit more resistance or a bit more of the blocks. But once they feel
Hmm.
heard and understood, once they feel safe, once that threat system, at least in the context of perhaps the group or the work, when the threat system is down regulated a bit, that allows them to open up and to explore these different ideas, perhaps.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, very much so.
You do have another book coming out, which is, I think, you're very, sort of looking forward to and excited about, as am I. Can you tell us a little bit about the next book? What's that about?
Yeah, this book I'm very excited about. Excuse me. Um, I was really encouraged or even pushed to publish this by some colleagues because thus far, our self-compassion program has only been available to teens whose parents could have, could would pay for a class or um, buy them the books. But this book is about, it's for educators and it's to get our self-compassion program into schools. So it's written for educators. There are several chapters that uh, in the beginning that explain to the educators what self-compassion is all about and best ways to teach self-compassion. And then most of the book is the actual self-compassion curriculum broken down into classroom size bites. So 45 minutes or so. There are 16 different sessions. And then there's a section for um, that are 10 to 15-minute long um, lessons. And the reason for that was that school counselors had told me that sometimes they only have 10 or 15 minutes in a classroom. They don't have 45 minutes. So these are just sort of, I call them drop-in sessions, bite-sized sessions where they can go in, for 10 or 15 minutes and do a self-compassion lesson. And so, yeah, I'm really excited about it because, it's been my passion to get this self-compassion message out there to all kids, to teens.
Yeah.
Um, and hopefully this will help. This will help make that happen.
What's your feeling about teachers then having MSc teacher training, or whether the book provides that and they're able to, sort of run with it, in the classrooms?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, what I have in the beginning of the book is I encourage them to practice themselves, and I give them some suggestions on ways to do that. One is to take a mindful self-compassion course. There's also a really wonderful book by Lisa Bayliss, which is Self-Compassion for Educators, which would also support them. But a lot of people can't afford these trainings, the MSc teacher training. It's lengthy, it's expensive, and I think if we required all educators to go through that process, to go through those trainings, it would be a long time before it reached the teens.
Mm.
So, there's a strong recommendation in the book to practice yourself, that you are the model and you are also deserving of self-compassion, just like everyone else. And you can't teach somebody how to swim unless you get in the pool. And I actually use that metaphor. So, I'm hoping that educators who read this will do that because, they really deserve it. They deserve to take care of themselves also,
Mm.
and they deserve to be compassionate to themselves. And I know as a classroom educator, which I was for almost 20 years, I know that it's hard. It's really, really hard to be a teacher. Um, it's just a very hard job. People are asking things of you for 8 hours. It's hard. It's hard work. So, they're certainly deserving of, and they're always thinking about the kids in the classroom. They're always thinking about, how can I make things easier for my students? How can I make things better for my students? Whenever we teach educators, all the time, the conversation will be, how can I teach my students rather than how can I help myself? So um, I'm hoping that they will take that to heart and practice, learn how to be self-compassionate themselves as well as teach their students.
It's the delicate balance of dissemination, isn't it? I guess that's what you're really sort of working on there. On the one hand, we want people who perhaps present MSc to others, or present self-compassion to others, to sort of do it well, or to sort of feel like they have that level of competency around, kind of the program itself. But we also want to get it out there, and we want to find ways that can be sort of as sort of easily accessed by teachers as possible, so that they don't have to travel, to another state, let alone around the world, to get the training, that they can have it in this kind of in the book, and really get started. And the teachers themselves, yes, it's probably going to be quite important that they, sort of, well, what's it feel like to try to be more self-compassionate? What does come up for me when I turn kindness more towards myself, and can I kind of experience that, so I can bring the experience to kind of communicating it to others and to the students, and I love that idea of options, 45-minute type sessions almost, 16 of those, but then these more bite-sized sessions. And you could
Mhm.
almost imagine that as teachers get more and more familiar with the ideas, that it'll actually come in sort of moment to moment almost, in sort of little specific conversations, or little opportunities are noticed and taken, the sort of across the day in a way.
Mhm. Mhm. Right. I mean, ideally, that's eventually what you want to get to
Yeah.
is, is as it comes up during the day. Here's an option. Here's a place where you can be kind to yourself. Here's a
Mm.
place where you can support yourself.
Yes. Yeah. For those of us who have teenagers in their lives, my one of mine is a bit older. It's more like sort of 19 or something. But we sort of see the struggles they face, and your heart goes out to them a little bit sometimes. As you say, that there seems to be even greater challenges in the world. How would you get the conversation going with them? Like, how would you even start to plant the seed, or sort of bring ideas such as mindfulness or self-compassion into the conversation, or sort of, or is it more about somehow allowing their own serendipity to sort of bring them to it, and to discover it for themselves? What are your thoughts there?
I think, and I'm actually frequently asked this question. I think the first thing that we can do as parents is model self-compassion. And um, in order to do that, of course, we have to practice self-compassion ourselves. So what that means is that when you make a mistake, rather than, you know, harping on yourself and like, oh, I'm such an idiot. Why did I do that? Why did I say that stupid thing? Why did I, burn dinner, whatever, rather than doing that, modeling, pointing out, and saying something like, um, "Ah, boy, I have a lot going on right now, and I think I'm just going to take a moment and sit down and take a few breaths and say some kind words to myself and encourage myself, or I'm just going to sit down and just for 2 minutes and just take a few breaths and just maybe have a cup of tea, or and relax for a few minutes, listen to a piece of music, and then I'll continue doing what I'm doing. But I realize, and just even articulating it. I mean, sometimes if it comes
Mm.
naturally, you can articulate it and say, boy, I have a choice right now. I can either beat myself up, yell at myself for this mistake that I just made, or I can just say to myself, you know what, you're human. You've had a really busy day at work, and let's just it's going to take a moment just to sit down
Mm.
and just relax for a few minutes. Put on
Mm.
headphones and listen to one piece of music, or five, or whatever, but if you don't have much time, listen to a piece of music and then continue doing what I was doing.
Mm. Mm. So modeling, but then even sort of that meta modeling, where you're sort of expressing out loud the kind of the dilemmas there, or the choices that one is making, and sort of communicating it that way. Um,
Yeah, I've often done that in the class when I'm teaching. If I make a mistake, which happens, of course, because I'm human like everybody else, pointing out the mistake and say, look, here's a place where I have a choice. I can beat myself up, or I can not. And I can, I'll give an example. I can, say some encouraging words, and then just that's it, and then go on. But I think they really get it when you do that. They really get it. Like, okay, this is what I'm thinking right now. This is my choice point.
Choice point.
I can go
Yeah.
this way, or I can go this way.
Mm.
Because we all have those choice points, right? We all have those moments where it's like, okay, beat myself up, or I can just say some kind words to myself,
Mm.
take a few breaths, and then go on.
Because they're soaking it up, aren't they? They're soaking up everything they see or witness in us, and sometimes you do hear little echoes of your own self-criticism come up from your kids, and you just think, oh, and then you have to be self-compassionate then as well. Um, but they're soaking it up, and if you can model it and express it and these choice points, and they will kind of discover it from there.
Yeah, and it's it never stops. And if your kids are older and you haven't been doing it, it's okay because they're still learning. My kids are, oh, my daughter just turned 32 last week, and my other daughter's almost 30, um there's still lots of opportunities that I have to model self-compassion.
Hmm. And isn't it interesting how they teach us as well?
Mhm. Very much so. Very much so. Yeah.
All right. Well, yes, I really do appreciate you being willing to spend some time with me and talk about especially self-compassion for teens. And it really is an enormous opportunity, isn't it? If we can just sort of work with people in those kind of ages and sort of plant these seeds early in a way, and there's a sort of an enormous potential there for what they can then take into the rest of their lives. If people are sort of interested in learning more about you and your work, or perhaps even be in touch or follow you, what are some options with all of that?
Well, probably the best way is my website, which is just karenbluth.com. Um, yeah, and then there's a lot of um, people out there teaching our teen course, Mindful Self-Compassion for Teens, regularly. So that's another, if people have teens that they think would benefit. Actually, I think all teens would benefit from this, but there are always people teaching classes
Mm.
ongoing. And if they want to get trained to teach it, we have ongoing teacher trainings also. The teacher trainings are through the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion.
Hmm.
So that's centerformsc.org.
Mm. I'll definitely put the link to your website and to your books. Uh, is there somewhere there's a link to all of the different MSc for Teens courses? Is that also at the Mindful Self-Compassion website, or?
At the moment, there are some on the Mindful Self-Compassion website. I also list some of them when teachers let me know. I list them on my website. So there is a page on my website, and I try to make it I, um, easily accessible. So it's on the landing page. There's a link directly that will take you to a page that has a listing of teachers who are currently offering courses. So if they let me know about it, I'll put it on there. And there are quite a few in Australia.
Oh, I was just going to ask about that as well. I will look
Yes,
into that and make sure that any kind of local links are available too. So,
and I
well,
can send you those also.
great. Thank you very much. Good, Dr. Karen Bluth. Well, thank you again. Thank you for all that you're doing and the contribution you're making, especially to young people's lives, but also for coming on and chatting with me on Compassion in a T-shirt.
Well, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks very much.